The agenda this week heard a prominent writer's view on Scottish independence. We considered what a child-free life means for Canada and observed how ownership is changing in a digital world. The Agenda's Week in Review begins with the road to reconciliation.
I truly believe that the Algonquins of Ontario are deserving of a settlement. They have worked tirelessly and been extremely patient for a very long period of time. And it strikes me that the real question is balance and fairness. So I'm going to state to you this morning that I reread the harvesting chapter this morning for the Algonquin land claim. I read it again this morning. Do you want to know what's been negotiated in terms of fish and wildlife interests in Ontario in that claim so far? In that AIP? Nothing.
Chief White Duck, does he have a legitimate concern here?
I don't think so. I think there's been some rules laid out in the that chapter with respect to Supreme Court decisions about how the rights are exercised and what priority they come in. I think what he's referring to is that there's no specific number saying the Algonquins get this number of moose, this number of fish in these certain locations, but those things will be worked out in management plans post final agreement. And we'll be working with Canada, Ontario, specifically Ministry of Natural Resources, to ensure sustainability, safety, and the exercise of our Aboriginal rights.
What do the anglers and hunters want to see?
Well, I think first, let me just respond to John. I know John quite well. I've talked to him numbers of times, and he was the superintendent when we were involved in the initial stages of the claim. What John fails to appreciate is it is an agreement in principle.
Meaning?
Meaning that it is in principle. There are lots of details that are required to be finalized. It sets a framework for the Algonquins to engage in nation-to-nation discussions with the governments of Canada and Ontario.
So it's not the end of the road.
It's by no means the end of the road.
Is it the middle of the road?
Well, it's starting down the road, and I'd say we're 25% on the way there. But the real work that is required is the next steps where we engage with people. And when they talk about reconciliation, reconciliation is about respect. And what we've gotten thus far is the first step of that respect, where the Algonquins have finally been acknowledged as having a claim, and there's actually some framework to the resolution of that claim. But when you see the elements of it in there, there are lots of things. The first thing is you have to establish what are the rights of the Algonquins as expressed in a treaty. It's taking the Supreme Court of Canada's decisions and trying, as Kirby says, to articulate what that means in relation to ongoing relationships with the governments and others in the territory. This is what the Harvest chapter does. It sets up a few pieces that are actually more particular, and I think the version John had read, which was the preliminary draft agreement in principle, never been done before, Stephen. Never in a treaty negotiation has it ever been permitted to have the document put out to the public for their consideration. Never has there been a vote done by the First Nation to determine whether there should be a draft agreement in principle approved. These are unique steps. So we've actually done things that allowed the public to see what we were doing, quite willing to be engaged with them in a discussion in that sense. But at the end of the day, this is a treaty that has to be negotiated government to government, Algonquins to the governments of Canada and Ontario, and ultimately they will engage with their stakeholders to find out what things they need to do vis-a-vis us.
The man on the hot seat the day that the Truth and Reconciliation report came out was Minister Bernard Valcourt. He said, "This is an occasion for all Canadians to reflect on this dark chapter in Canada's history that has left a profound mark on our country. Reconciliation is not to forgive and forget, but to remember and change. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission has stated that reconciliation is a goal that will take the commitment of multiple generations." That's the Minister, Bernard Valcourt, earlier this month. All right, let's get some feedback on those words. What do you think when you hear those words from him?
I think we agree that it's going to take multiple generations, 7 generations perhaps, I think is the Indigenous teaching around these kinds of questions, but it doesn't mean that it can't start now. And in fact, it's overdue. If we look, 1996, the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples was released. It had a 20-year plan, 440 recommendations. So we would be a very different country, I think, if we had started to live into those recommendations in 1996. We would be, 19 years into that plan in a very, I think, changed, transformed country. And so it's more than overdue, the kinds of calls to action that are expressed in the Truth and Reconciliation final report. And we need to be active on them now. There are things the government can do right now that could begin to move this forward.
Tell me one thing the government could do today to move this along.
Could call a national inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women.
They've already said they're not going to do that.
Right?
Pick a second thing.
Well, they could address inequities in child welfare and education for First Nations children. That's a very significant issue they could be addressing right now.
Paul Martin's been bugging them to do that for a long time. When you see the minister's language, what comes to mind?
Justice Sinclair's comment actually comes to my mind very quickly. Education got us into this mess as a country, and education will get us out of this mess. And I think that one of the encouraging signs I see is that there are a number of provincial jurisdictions across the country and territorial ones that have actually taken significant steps to include in the curricula in public schools the story of the residential schools.
You saw the news from Manitoba just the other day, right? They're now going to have that as part of their curriculum.
And there are several jurisdictions that are doing that.
So finish this sentence for us to give us a better sense about what you're trying to achieve here. The circular economy is an approach that, what?
Recirculates all of our resources back into the economic cycle so that we never lose them. And they just keep getting circulated over and over and over again. And it's a concept that we used to live by before the Industrial Revolution, but at some point we got off track. And we adopted this linear model where we just take, make, and dispose of products. So circular economy attempts to get us back into that circular way of doing business.
Why did we get away from it if that's what we were doing for so many hundreds, if not thousands of years?
Well, I'm not sure exactly how it happened, but at some point we as consumers and corporations decided that ownership was the way to be. We needed to own products and goods, and that we couldn't borrow them or share them or rent them anymore. That if we wanted to be successful, we needed to own things. Everything from clothing to appliances to cars to bicycles, everything had to be owned. And as soon as you own something, when its life is over, you're stuck with it. And I don't have a connection to get it back to the manufacturer so they can reutilize some of the components. It sits in my basement. And that's kind of where that circular piece broke down and it became a linear model.
Even in my lifetime, though, we did used to, I mean, I do recall, anybody who's young who's watching this will not get this, but they used to build houses with little holes in the walls with doors on both sides, because when you were finished with the jug of milk, you'd put it in there and the milkman would come and, right? I mean, we did do this quite in a widespread way all the time. We did get away from it, though, didn't we?
Absolutely. And I mean, a part of it is there's a number of things, and one of them is the cost of labor versus the cost of raw materials, where we have so much subsidization of primary resource extraction that it became cheaper to purchase raw materials over and over and over again than reutilizing raw materials, because that was more labor intensive. But we're starting to see things change, and we're starting to see corporations realize that they can actually make more money by bringing back products, remanufacturing, retooling them, recycling them, composting them, and also have a better relationship with their customers.
If we did this and got away from it, is there something special about this particular moment in history that is making us reconsider the need to do this again?
Well, it's a combination of things. Certainly climate change is front and center, and that's really spearheading a lot of this, is that we know that when we recirculate goods, whether it's metals primarily, plastics, and even food waste, we will move closer to mitigating climate change. For all materials, food waste is a great example. 40% of our food from the field right through to our table gets wasted. If we were to rechannel that food into human beings, livestock, and the rest of it compost to reneutralize our soils, we would actually do great gains in terms of mitigating climate change.
Carmi, you go to a store, you choose a bicycle, you buy the bicycle, that means you own it, right?
In theory, anyway, up until now, this mechanical object that is a bicycle, and I'm an avid cyclist, and every bike I've bought, my assumption is when I bring it home, I own it, I own every aspect of it, and when I want to change it, when I want to tweak it to my preference, move the seat, change the handlebars, make it my machine, that I have every right to do exactly that. And I've been riding bikes for decades, and that's always been the case. No one's ever called me on it. When they see my bike on the road, you're violating our copyright. No, this is my bike, this is what I ride.
Well, let's change it up a bit, Larissa. Then instead of a bike, it's a smart TV. It's got some computerized brain in there or something like that. Perhaps you're going to hook up to the internet as well. If I buy that, do I own it the same way outright as if I were to buy this glass or this piece of paper?
Well, I mean, it's an interesting question. Essentially, we are talking about new ways of defining things. So, you know, back to the kind of, you know, things on wheels example, are you buying a computer on wheels? Or when it comes to a tractor or a car, are you buying a machine for farming that just happens to have a computing system inside it?
I mean, it's a good question. What's the answer?
Well, I think the answer is, if the computer system is just a component of the tractor, if it is there to make the tractor work as a tractor, you own the tractor, you control the agenda over the tractor, that means you should be able to modify, alter, tinker with that computing system as you see fit.
You may not be surprised to hear John Deere doesn't agree with you.
Not surprised at all.
Here's the thing. John Deere, you know, the guys who make the tractors, they put digital locks on the tractors so people couldn't alter the software that comes on the tractors. And when a petition apparently was delivered to the Copyright Office in the US asking John Deere to remove those locks, the company says, we only license the software. The owner of the vehicle has an implied license for the life of the vehicle, and therefore accessing the software could violate copyright or contractual rights. Does that make sense to you?
So Steve, there's a lot going on in that.
Okay.
And so I think we kind of need to break it down a little bit. So the first thing I think we want to focus on today is, it's one thing to put a lock on something you sell. It's another thing to try to get the state to back you up in stopping people from breaking those locks. And I think the latter is what we're really talking about today. So I sell you something, I sell you this pen, and I've somehow managed to put a lock so the two pieces stick together. Once I sell it, up to you to break that lock and use a pen as you see fit. So that's the first question we need to kind of figure out today, is what is with John Deere going to the state saying, look, back us up, stop people breaking these locks. And then I think once we start figuring that part out, we can start to answer other questions.
There's this famous scene in Trainspotting where a character says he doesn't hate the English, he hates the Scots for being colonized by the English. Is that how you saw it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the Scots were colonised by the English. I think England colonised Ireland. It didn't colonise Scotland. It got into a pact, basically, and that's what makes it the whole thing. Not in the traditional sense. I mean, you can argue economically that there's this kind of economic imperialism going on, but you can argue that with between different parts of England as well. I think it was. I don't think it's It's a very complicated thing because, I mean, Scots were kind of were disproportionately big partners in imperialism. I mean, the whole kind of imperialist sort of project was given its, it was the English mercantile fleet, but it was also the, the Scottish kind of ideology, the ideas that came out of the Scottish Enlightenment that were the kind of David Hume that was the sort of kind of the harbinger of it all. And I think also that a lot of the bad things about imperialism was disproportionately Scottish. I mean, the slave trade, the Scottish overseers in the slave trade, the formation of the Ku Klux Klan with Scottish generals after the Civil War was kind of... so there's a very negative side that Scotland kind of inputted into imperialism as well, into British imperialism too. So that makes it a much more complex thing, and the unraveling of that whole kind of national identity, I think, has been a complicated thing as we've gone through the 20th century and into the 21st century. I mean, the kind of when I grew up, there was a very negative thing about in Scotland. I mean, I hated the whole idea of Scottish nationalism because I hated this idea of blaming the English for everything, you know, and it was like, and I grew up with that, and I grew up, you know, a lot of my family are from England, and well, you know, and lived in England. I got sent down there as a kid to during the school holidays and all that. So we're coming back, and you hear all, and you heard people saying, "Oh, the English, we hate the English." And I thought I couldn't kind of get on
Doesn't
board
jive with
that.
your understanding of things.
No, not at all.
So what changed your mind?
Well, what happened was that you know, the second phase, the Renton thing was when it kind of started to change in the 80s, and it was that idea that it's nothing to do with English, it's our fault. You know, we sort of we kind of brought this on ourselves. It's our our servility, our putting up with this kind of relationship. But that was negative as well, because it was like a kind of very much a self-flagellation sort of thing. You know, we're so wretched and pathetic. But the third phase, the phase that you have now, and this has been where I've been inspired by the new generation of Scots, the kind of the people that have grown up with the devolved Parliament and have grown up with that whole different sense of things. It's a much more pragmatic thing. It's like it doesn't matter who's to blame. Let's just sort it out. You know, how can we sort this out? So they're not really interested in kind of finger pointing and sort of and kind of beating themselves up or kind of blaming someone else.
So if that's the case, why do the majority of Scots vote no?
I think what happens in Scotland, I think, is that there's probably about 30% of the people who are hardcore no voters who want to be part of the Great Britain at any cost. And there's probably maybe about 30% that are hardcore nationalists who want to be independent at any cost. And I think that, you know, the kind of 40% in the middle are pragmatists. They want more power. They want better. You know, they want a healthier democracy. They want more control over their own affairs and all that. And what happened with the yes/no thing? They didn't have a Devo Max option, so they polarised. And I think it was. I actually thought at the time it was going to tip slightly towards yes, and they were actually going to do it. But there was a massive fear propaganda campaign, particularly with the elderly people being particularly susceptible to it. I think in the long run, I think a lot of people felt that, you know, there's two things. I think that a lot of older people felt that basically, you know, they remember the kind of glory days of Britain, the post-war settlement, industry empire, and the kind of and a kind of more of a homogenous kind of society.
And they identify with that.
And they identified with that. So I think that the real problems will come, you know, when they're over 65s now, you know, in 10 years' time, I think that's going to be a huge problem for the unity of Britain. But I think also that, and a lot of people were susceptible to the fear campaign, but I think what happened was as well that why the Labour Party were so punished in this last election is that they were duped by the Conservatives and kind of underwrote. They had this thing called the vow, which they vowed as much kind of the three party leaders would say you can have as much devolution as you like. You can have as much as you desire, and I think a lot of people were bought off by that basically. And it hasn't materialised. You know, they offered people control of their own road signs instead of control of their own taxation. So I think that that massive backlash and massive anger has kind of destroyed the Labour Party in Scotland, and it's also kind of set things on a path of separation. I mean, I don't think it's just so much that Scotland's leaving the Union. I think it's actually being de facto pushed out of it as well by a very kind of an aggressive kind of sort of Greater Englandism that's evolved in the south of England.
Now, you didn't vote because you live in Chicago, but had you voted, how would you have voted?
I would have voted yes, because I mean I wrote a piece for the Guardian saying that this is kind of going to happen because there's no real glue holding Britain together. So it's probably better that it happens now and we can get out of the way, and that England gets a chance to kind of democratically redefine itself and redefine what it is. Because Scotland had this whole process of debate that happened in Scotland with the referendum. I think the process of debate was much more interesting and much more crucial in the long run than the actual result, because it galvanised people and it got people believing in democracy and change again. And I think that England needs that moment too.
Molly, I want to find out whether, once you made it abundantly clear to your friends and family that motherhood was not in the picture for you, what was the feedback?
Actually, I think in many ways I've lived a life that was my mother's dream life.
Isn't that interesting?
You know, so I think that she wanted to have creative freedom, that she wanted to have a different kind of life than she had. And so I didn't...
Even a childless life?
I think
Child-free.
even a child-free
okay.
life, even a child-free life. So I never got negative feedback from my mother, and I would ask her about it, and she would say, "You go ahead and lead the life that you need to live," and also. I'm the first person in my family to go to college. I come from a working class background. I wanted to be a writer. It was so unusual in my family for somebody to want to do something like that. So I was an anomaly, and nobody quite understood me. But at the same time, I was going
Molly,
for a dream.
Hang on a sec, Molly.
Yeah.
It's one thing to say you know, it's got to hurt when your mother says to you, "I kind of wish I never had kids." Come on.
It does.
You know.
I think it does, and I think I took it in. And part of that is part of my own development as a person. I had to find a way to grow around that.
Bruce, people, well, I should ask, do you think people find it difficult to let go of this image of the quote-unquote nuclear family being normal?
I think so. And as you said before, I think everywhere we look, the nuclear family is still perceived as the best, the normal, what we should be aiming for. Whether that's in sort of just talking to people that you know, your own families, or you're looking at the sort of government programs, right?
And
Stump
ironically,
speeches.
it really isn't anymore, is it?
No, I mean, statistically, it's far from it. I mean, there are far few sort of married families, divorce is up, there's lots more single-parent families, there's lots more co-parenting. And so partly that's where sort of our book sort of came from, with this idea that saying families can be so much more different in the 21st century than they were even a generation ago. It's sort of time to look at that and sort of say there are lots of ways we can make families. Sometimes it's two men, sometimes it's two women, sometimes there's kids, sometimes they're not. We need to be more open about these and have these discussions.
I am totally intrigued how you went from being somebody who for, let's say, 40, 41, 42, 43 years of your life assumed that children would be a part of that picture, and then somehow made your peace with the notion that actually it's not going to be that way at all. How'd you do that?
I got fed up of crying. I just had one day when I woke up and I just thought, enough is enough. Let's just live our lives. I'm in a lovely marriage with a lovely man. Let's just get on with it. Because for years, our lives were focused around getting pregnant. And then I had a couple of pregnancies. They were the happiest time of my life. But they didn't come to fruition, obviously. You just have to make peace with it. If you want to live a happy life, you have to get on with it. And I did feel this lack. I did feel childless. And over the course of the years of doing fertility treatments, I worked on my garden. I cultivated new friendships. I took art classes, traveled, and I started to realize this is pretty good. This is great. We have 2 dogs. I have nieces and nephews. I have a lovely family.
You got a great job. I mean, you got a full life.
I have a great
job. Yeah, you got a lot of good things happening in your life.
Recently, I was a visiting lecturer at Queen's. That was a job I would not have been able to do if I had had children. So the consolation prize of not having children is not having children. We don't have to worry about them.
Is this something, I mean, you say you got tired of waking up crying every day. I don't know if this is the right way to say it, but I'll just say it. I mean, are you kind of over? Are you over it?
It's interesting because in this day and age with reproductive technology, well, my husband and I will joke about it. Egg donor surrogate? Maybe. It's unlikely. So we kind of still have this dream. It's not reality. So we kind of have these fantastic children, like science fiction children, which is actually not science fiction with reproductive technology. So I think so much of our relationship was spent trying to have children that we never really 100% give up on the notion. We're not going to have children.
But you have to.
But the idea
has to stay
is still there. I mean, there are women who have been impregnated in their 60s and have had live births.
You're not going to be one of them.
It's highly unlikely.
Isn't that funny? You still won't say no. You say it's highly unlikely.
Yes.
Because that you have to hang on to that dream of parenthood.
I'm not pathetically hanging on to this dream.
Okay.
And quite frankly, at my age, I don't want to be an old parent. And as I mentioned, we're empty nesters. Do we really want to embark on that now? But you're right. We will not flat out say never.
And adoption?
We never say never.
You never say never. Adoption was never an issue for you guys?
I love that question, and I hate that question.
Because?
Why didn't you adopt?
Why didn't I?
You didn't need to. It's
Right.
okay. It was a rhetorical question.
Okay.
You didn't need to. Well, with reproductive technology, we don't need to. And also, I wouldn't want to have adoption as the second choice. Unless you're Angelina Jolie, most people want biological children.
And that is the Agenda's Week in Review. You can see all of those programs in their entirety. They're all on our website, theagenda.tvo.org, on our iTunes channel, and on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit supporttvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.